and welcome to the Scaling Up Business Podcast. I'm your host and scaling coach, Bill Gallagher. I'm joined this week by Lisa Ridley and Daniel Marcos. Lisa, you're in the Phoenix area, right?
Yeah, Phoenix, Scottsdale.
Yeah, Phoenix area. Lisa is also an advisory board member, just a badass coach in the world of scaling up. Her company's compassgroup.coach. And Daniel Marcos joins us. Daniel, it looks like you're in Toronto today.
In Toronto today.
And that's a totally Torontan accent.
Oh, yes.
Daniel's originally from Mexico. His Business Growth Institute has all of our online learning, as well as being an advisory board member and, an international coach of some accomplishment, serial entrepreneur, that kind of thing. Lisa, say a little bit more about your background and your work before we get into our topic of today.
Yeah, sure. I spent my first 15 to 20 years working in high-growth entrepreneurial firms and realized that while I loved high-growth entrepreneurial companies, I didn't so much love any particular business. I just love the foundations and what it takes to build the business. So that's what led me to coaching. I've been doing that for about 15 years.
Mm-hmm. And Daniel?
I've been an entrepreneur for 20 years, built my first company when I was 26 in Mexico. I've done 3 or 4, some great exits, some bad close-ups or closing companies. So I've been all over, and I've been a CEO coach for the last 11 years. And today, the CEO of the Growth Institute, co-founder with Vern, bringing thought leadership to mid-market companies all over the world.
Yeah, and the need to bring that and in the online sort of asynchronous style, right? People can learn on their own schedule and their own time as well as live, like makes a huge difference.
Yeah, we have both, but our most popular programs are the ones that are half asynchronous and half synchronous.
Yeah, the hybrid, right?
The hybrid method, yeah.
Yeah.
That's usually our most popular programs.
Well, and I want to remind folks that we have recorded now 218 episodes, right? So we've been doing this for 4 years, and we have thousands of listeners around the world. But there's a huge backlog. So on virtually any topic in the world of scaling up, you'll find something on iTunes, Stitcher, on our website, scalingcoach.com, or wherever you go to get your podcast, that kind of thing. At YouTube also, our audio is there, as well as some of these that are video as well. So we've got a big range of them and lots of downloads of the tool. So every time we're on, you'll find the notes and links to our guests and hosts and that kind of thing there, scalingcoach.com. We're also, any one of us are happy to help you find a coach. There's more demand now for coaching than there ever has been before. And people are just hungry for it. And we have created collectively, the 200 plus coaches around the world have created more flexible options for you to do it, whether online or hybrid or live or like that. We're doing probably more work collectively as a group than we ever have, because so many people are in so many things, starting with the pandemic now. Well, first we had labor issues, then suddenly there's abundance of that, but we have work restrictions globally, pandemic, travel restrictions, that kind of thing. And now suddenly we've got profound social unrest in the country. So we thought we'd talk about our compounded crisis and inclusion and diversity and like that. Now, we're depending on your classification, we're two pretty white people and a brown person.
By the way, we'll talk about that. Mexico, we had our first civil unrest yesterday.
You did, yeah. Well, but I think even beyond this, and is how to. Vern shares in the quote, Dr. Francis Fry saying that one of the most important decisions we'll make is how to remove barriers to people's unique capabilities. When we don't have diversity, when we have these biases, of course, we aren't getting the best of our people and all of our people, right?
And by the way, Bill, the link is available. Vern shared it. So I think it'll be important we share it below this podcast.
Yeah.
People to hear. But I thought Francis Fry was on spot. That was a YPO exclusive webinar that we run 3 weeks ago. And Francis Fry was one of the speakers at the summit.
Yes.
And she did brilliant. And her whole presentation is available for everyone to watch.
Yes.
Yeah, it's well worth watching. I checked it out last night.
So we see when things go well and when there's a diversity of thought and perspective and type and that kind of thing. And we're also now seeing the profound social cost when there is a lack of respect and an ignorance and a lack of safety and all of that all over the world. What's happening in your worlds and with the your clients and the communities that you're in? What are you noticing now?
I think that I think it's interesting, and one of the things that both is so disturbing about all of this, as well as gives me hope, is the transparency, the forced transparency, right? I think that there's so many images and so many things that we're seeing that are really difficult to see, and that's the point. And these things have been going on for a long time. It's forcing conversations that I haven't heard before, and people are being willing to speak up and stand up. And I think that that's really, that's the first step. It's a very weak step, but it's the first step that has to happen. And I've been really encouraged to see that from people that I have not seen that before.
Yeah.
And I really believe a crisis amplifies everything, the good and the bad. And this health crisis is amplifying the financial crisis, but then it's amplifying the social crisis that we have.
Right.
I need to just bring it up. I lived in the US for 15 years, and I saw this kind of things happening for the last 15 years. And it was an unrest of a week or whatever, and then it died, and just in a city, and now it's spreading globally. It's crazy. We're seeing the same people marching, or people marching in England, in Mexico, all over the world. Now people are really, really tired of government control and how the police have acted in the past with too much control, too much force. And they're just using this opportunity to be able to share that. And by the way, social distancing is gone. It's crazy how people are in the streets really close to each other. I haven't seen no social distancing at all in the marches. Just people are more worried about and more infected or affected by the social issues, that they're not caring that much about social distance. And of course, the numbers are coming up again. That was a discussion. Just we could go back to that later, but we were saying that probably when the summer was here, the virus was going to go down because of the weather, the climate. They say it died after 44 degrees or something like that. And now it's pretty hot in all Latin America. Brazil is really hot now, and the numbers are climbing really, really fast. So that's a new thing that we're learning about this. So I think we're having a lot of unrest, health, financial, and social, and that's complicating things even more.
It does seem a mess, doesn't it? And I'm concerned personally about the social distancing and the need to be safe and smart. And I think that whatever the reality of things are, that it's smart to be kindful and respectful of other people, right? To take care, to when I walk around my neighborhood, as I pass people, I put the mask on. If there's nobody around, I carry it in my hand. And so that kind of mix of stuff is important. But you're right, we're seeing this stuff, and it's like the concerns are so, the tensions, the feelings are so high that people are just abandoning some of these things, but not 100%, right? There's an awful lot of masks in the crowd, but not 100%, nor a demand for them across the board.
Or people just very close to each other.
Yeah. So I've always been a straight white male. And I laugh and I joke, and maybe that's insensitive and inappropriate in this time, but I recognize with each year the profound privilege of being born in my skin, in my place, and that kind of thing. And I've only had momentary inklings, either from sharings of people that are close to me who've shared experiences with me, and that I've had with empathy and ability to sense something of their world. And then a couple of moments in my life where I was like, where I wasn't the dominant important one. I can remember being in an airport in Pakistan in a remote place, and like being the only face that looked like me around, and not knowing the language and feeling completely like vulnerable and out and uncomfortable. And I can remember being a child, but these are like two moments in my whole life. What would that be like to be every day? I can remember as a kid being in a couple places that were very dangerous, where I was definitely like a minority and maybe not loved or welcomed. And what would that be like to walk in or find yourself jogging or mistreated at the bank or everything like that? And I think back about that, and it's like, I don't think I'll ever get under my skin what it's like to do that. But if I'm listening and interested in what it might be like to be somebody else, I can appreciate some of that.
Yeah, I think that clearly, as a white woman, I have much the same experience. Certainly as a woman, I can say that I've experienced marginalization, if you will, or attempted, but nothing can compare to the Black experience. And I think that's really kind of the point. And it's not an either or, but it is enough is enough. This has to stop. I mean, it has.
Yeah.
And I think that's, as I said earlier, I think that's so much of this is just so disturbing and heartbreaking. And at the same time, the videos and the transparency that is being forced here is one thing that does at least give me hope that this conversation won't die down. It won't stop. That everyone is finally realizing. I mean, looking at Colin Kaepernick and looking at the change in conversation about that, the condemnation that he received, so crazy, but for his actions, and now how the narrative is changing. It's ridiculous that it's taken this long for that narrative to be changing, but now people are finally getting it's not about the flag, it's about the injustice. And that has to be the conversation. Let's quit trying to divert the conversation to the things that aren't as meaningful, and let's talk about the right things. Because it's talking is the first step. We have to stop being silent. Then I think it's having some clarity on what actions people can take, and that means being willing to do some research. There's a lot of articles this week about the difference between saying, well, I'm not a racist, and being anti-racist. And really it's about being willing to take action and being willing to invest yourself. And how willing have all of us been to do that while we sit safely on the sidelines? I think that's, for me anyway, and for those I've been engaging with and hearing and leaders I've been talking to, that's a shift in the conversation that's finally taking place as people are recognizing they have to take some action.
So that's Vern shares an HBR article in the update. U.S. business must take meaningful action against racism, and the need to take meaningful direct action, not simply to not propagate it, is insufficient given what's happening in our culture. And I have to admit, with a deep apology and sadness, that I have heard headline after headline and thought, that's horrifying, that's tragic, but it's what happens. It's like a horrible, mean world, and things happen. But that's, I'm ashamed to admit that, but it's honest. When I saw that video, so when I read about the case of Breonna and the no-knock warrant, and here's a woman asleep who's shot dead by police serving a warrant in a case of mistaken location. We've read of and it was kind of like, oh, that's just horrifying. And but I didn't think about it that much. When I saw, and I saw the headline about the Floyd case, and I was like, oh, that's just another horrifying, tragic thing. But when I saw the video and the casual, callous indifference of these police as this man's life ends, I wept and I was gutted. And now I hear people screaming about unrest and the destruction of the property and whatever. Like, we're talking about lives versus a store. Your insured property. I mean, I don't justify, but the rage of people is justified. Their actions may not be appropriate or helpful, but I think you got to get that, right?
Yeah, and I am certainly the last thing from an expert on this, but what's even more disturbing about that is how so many people don't realize that a lot of the destruction is being caused by whatever label you want to put on them, but white supremacists who are just trying to change the narrative. That it's not, literally, I mean, I live in the Phoenix, Scottsdale area. There was a protest earlier this week in Scottsdale Fashion Square, which has got to be the cheapiest, high-end, most ridiculous, example of consumerism. There were riots and people looting, and it's just like, and there was a bunch of white people walking around doing that. And it's just like, are you kidding me? Like, are you kidding me? Then that's the story, and that's the conversation, and that's ridiculous. It's not, yeah. So to your point, yeah. And that's where I think, the video and one of the things that I've looked into this week and where I put my money, where my mouth is in terms of taking action, are organizations that are pushing for more body cams and more, making sure that the police, that things have to be recorded. We can't keep letting that stuff slide under the table, if you will.
Let me just add a different perspective to that, and something that I think it's important to add. All of this started by a video of a 17-year-old teenager that she was walking on the street, or she was there, she got her phone, her reaction. That's what created all of this unrest. So I think she's
not the police body cam, right? But
that's correct, right? So
yeah, no, exactly.
I would love to come back later to talk about cell phones and the tool that is happening. The other day I was watching an interview of an ex-mob guy, and he said this is the worst time to be in the mob business. Like, there's phones everywhere, there's cameras everywhere. Like, before we used to do things no one knew that we did it. Today,
under the rug, right?
Everything's on video.
Yeah.
So now every citizen is a media company working to make money, to report things, to complain on the. It's crazy, the availability and the tools that we're having today, and I think that's been amplified by technology.
No, I mean the Central Park incident, with Christian Cooper, the CCTVs. I mean, yeah, no, absolutely. So you're absolutely right, Daniel. It's not just the police body cams. That's in fact more often it's going to be individuals with cell phones and CCTV and all the cameras in stores and that are going to make the difference.
How many cameras have you seen about the guy with the guy on the knee? Like, how many cameras? 6 or 5 or 6 different.
Yeah,
it's crazy.
That's actually a pretty powerful thing about both the internet and the wide. Like, everybody's got a high quality video camera and still camera in their pocket now, and can capture things as they are disturbed by, and they need to shine a light on something, right?
I think that's brilliant.
We saw where was the city where the 75-year-old protester is an old white guy is pushed back by the police. And
Buffalo, wasn't it Buffalo?
I think so.
Like 75.
75, right? He's a serial peace protester. He's like my parents, really. Like, they're a little bit older, but they've been peaceniks their whole life, and here he's shoved by police with no physical altercation. There's some discussion or something that's going on. He falls back. He's bleeding from his head. People call out, and the police walk by, and one policeman appears to say to another to leave the person alone. And this is horrifying. In the middle of protests around police violence, we've got police violence.
I think, Bill, it's a great point, and it's not a great point, but it's
important.
It's an important point, and part of, I think, the institutional attitudes, and it's not just the racism, but it's literally just the training, and the accountability that has to change. And not just police. I mean, police is obviously the huge focus of this, but it's so systemic and institutionalized across the U.S. But until there's a change in both the training and how we hold people accountable, then.
But you've got that. You've got an unchecked broy, thuggish police force in some places. I also know I have met lots of really deeply caring, good police officers. We're talking particularly about the U.S. right now. And I've witnessed horrifying things and seen like really nasty, mean-spirited, obnoxious, and they're out in a deeply like tense, violent, armed, especially in the U.S., highly armed environment. And so their whole attitude becomes more and more militarized every day. But then against that, we've got this deeply rooted racism. We've got the Confederate flag still being waved proudly and all that represents, with people who still honor and cling to that, who haven't quite given up on that kind of view of reality, right?
Yeah.
It's deeply disturbing. Now, this is the fabric that and background that we operate in, and other countries have their own versions of it, right? We've got now protests going on in Paris and around the world in solidarity and expressing the need to control this dominant militaristic forces and inherent racial biases. And virtually every country's got some form of something going on like that. This is our particular.
So let me tell you this story that happened yesterday that I think it's important outside of the U.S. perspective.
Yeah.
So we see that there's some marches about Black Lives Matter and everything in England and things.
Yeah.
But something happened in Mexico that I thought it was very interesting. It was a group of citizens.
Yeah.
That they were against the government.
Yeah.
Against rich people in the country.
Yeah.
Segregation of wealth. And they were walking from the U.S. Embassy. They started outside the U.S. Embassy, and they were walking to the representation house of Jalisco state. It's one of the wealthiest states in the country, where a police officer was recorded on camera being too aggressive on a citizen. Very similar to what happened in the U.S. But they were saying police officers are tougher to people that are poor than to people that are rich. In the country, the division of poor and rich is very wide, and there's a belief, and yes, I believe it's true, that there's been a better treatment for people of money. So these people were walking from one part of the city to the other, marching, and then in a street that they're getting closer to this representation of the state of Jalisco, they go through a street with beautiful buildings, with doorman and like a really, really nice. And they begin breaking all the glasses of all the buildings, breaking the entrance of the stores, looting on the street, and spray painting with black ink that police officers are corrupt, and then the government, whatever, and this is the problem of the rich, really, really aggressive.
Yeah.
So, of course, the Mexican government sends a group of police officers, and the police officers react very aggressively. That what they have shown, but they were going against people breaking into private property and all that, and they acted aggressively because it was a really big group. And now there's a huge attack against the police, and we're having the same similar feeling in Mexico that we're having. But instead of being Black Lives Matter, it's rich against poor. But they're also, the police was in the middle, and now we have the same feeling. So this is what we're seeing. I know we have a huge difference in the US, and I've lived in the US, I said, for 15 years and felt it personally, being Hispanic. But also, I think we have a deeper social unrest in the world, and we all have our own differences in every country. This is the difference that is bringing society outside of the US. But I think we're going to start seeing it all over the world. And yesterday for me was the perfect feeling of in Mexico having the same social unrest and just being shared in a different way.
Well, I think that, and I think, Bill, you brought it up earlier, it's been an interesting year, to say the least, right? People are, there's, we've got the pandemic, we've got the oil crisis, which has gotten lost in this whole shuffle, but that certainly has impacted, a lot of businesses. We have a lot of uncertainty, and we don't do well, human beings, with uncertainty, right? We crave answers and clarity and control. And I think that all of this is sort of a perfect storm, which has contributed to this, like we're almost looking for an outlet for that fear and uncertainty and unrest.
The stress increases, right?
It's
Enormously.
Yeah. And people are under financial stress and health stresses, and they're worried about loved ones. They're worried about the future. And then you add this to it. And I think that this is an outlet that is people have in some way been craving a place to put their energy. There's up and downsides to that. I think the upside is people are putting their energy behind this in a way that hopefully will not let it just die down as, oh, gosh, that's too bad, right? And then we move on.
So we saw Apple CEO Tim Cook's letter and message on the subject, and obviously he represents a massive and important company in the world. But what communications are you seeing from business leaders that you think are helpful or not helpful?
So let me just share on our side, Growth Institute.
Yeah.
We had a really big discussion internally.
Yeah.
If we should react and send a communication.
Yeah.
And we first agreed, yes, we have to stand by our core values and at least share what we believe.
Yeah.
And we had a big discussion of what we should share. And then we got to a discussion saying, hey, at Growth Institute, we have these thought leaders from all over the world. And we realized we did not have any thought leader of color.
Mm.
We are recording a class with someone from India today. We have 2 thought authors from India. We had a couple from Latin America, or a couple of Hispanics, but most of our thought leaders are white male. So internally, we had a big discussion and said, hey, we could not say anything about the world if we are not living this internally. So we send an email saying, hey, when we begin having a discussion, we realize that we're not doing it right because we don't have the right representation of the world. So we have a commitment for us to start looking for great thought leaders that are Black or of color and all kind of race of the world. And if we want to be a global company, we have to represent the globe like that. And we even got a lot of hate mail just saying, hey, we made it wrong. We want to make it well internally. We got a lot of prizes of email, but we had a lot of people very aggressive against us, saying, hey, unsubscribe me, you're blah, blah, blah.
Really?
And we were attacked of being white male, and I'm a Hispanic guy. Like
you were attacked for being it, or for suggesting that maybe you were going to de-emphasize?
So I got an attack by saying that I have to represent the world and have people from all races.
Yeah. And
we got a couple of attacks from, I don't know if you want to call it white supremacists or white people, saying that you should do the best, and if you try to balance, you're going to decrease your quality, kind of, right? We got some of those, and I thought they were terrible. And by the way, we delete them from the database. But then I also got attacked by saying that I was promoting violence in the world, and I was promoting making this bigger. Oh. And I said, I'm just making an internal reflection that we're to do it better, right?
Yeah.
But that just shares how much people are unhappy with life. Yeah. I really believe when someone makes life hard on you, it's because they're having a hard time themselves, and this is a reflection on what they're feeling and what they're going through.
Yeah, I think that you just raised a really interesting point, and that's like all of us, it's like, okay, so what do we say? What do we put out there? And you don't want to just be Me Too social media crap, actually not using Me Too as the movement, but just saying literally, jumping on a bandwagon to try to do something from that perspective. But at the same time, I mean, that's why, I put a post on LinkedIn and Facebook, and just a very short one. And what I said was, I think so often people are silent because we don't know what to say, or we're afraid of saying the wrong thing. And what you just said, I think I guess we have to be willing, and I know you are, to be attacked in the right or the wrong way, because I think that is why so often people stay silent. I am ashamed to say that certainly publicly, like on social media and out there, I haven't said a lot for probably that reason. And also because I feel like I'm a white woman who was raised in a very privileged environment. And yes, as a woman, I've experienced things, but nothing to compare to certainly the Black experience. And who am I to talk about it, right? I mean, there's almost that feeling where I just feel like it's inappropriate. In a way, it feels inappropriate for me to be commenting on it now. Yet we all have to be willing to. And what I found very interesting is that I don't post a lot. I'm not a big social media person. I put it on LinkedIn. I just looked it up just now. There's been 3 likes. 3. Like, I've posted stupid links to articles, very non-controversial leadership articles before, where I've gotten, hundreds of likes. And so I look at that, I'm like, wow, are people scared to like it? It's a very short, innocuous post simply saying Black Lives Matter. I find that very interesting and sad. It's because there's been over 200 views, but 3 likes.
We were surprised by the response and the diverse response. But I agree with you. We're afraid of having being criticized, and we just prefer to be quiet. And I think that's wrong. Or people are afraid of going to the streets for them to be attacked by police or being hurt, and they're being silent.
People are really afraid of provoking something. And I think the key thing, right, is if you do provoke some negative response, is not to get defensive, right? If somebody lays into me for this or for anything else, I think I'd rather say, oh, thanks, I got it. Okay, good. Let me consider that, right? But people are terrified of this kind of thing. And what makes it worse is to try to defend or explain right away instead of simply to accept and embrace. And we see that in our interactions between folks, right? And I know, Daniel, you maybe need to add some interesting and influential African American other groups, but you probably had Raj Sisodia, you probably had Salim Ismail.
We're recording with Raj. We're recording another thought leader from India.
Yeah,
we have from Latin America. We have some Asian thought leaders.
You've probably had blitzscaling.
Yep.
Right.
No, we have a lot of diversity.
Yeah.
But I do applaud you for recognizing the gap, and that's what I think that's what we all have to do, right? When we look around,
who am I to criticize anyone else?
Yeah, I mean, and we all have to. I mean, I notice it. As a coach, some of my clients have had started out with very non-diverse executive teams, right? I mean, most of my clients are white males. Not because that's who I target, but because most CEOs are white males. That's just the demographic reality, right? So demographically, that's going to happen. As coaches, are we willing to speak up and say, hey, where are the women? Where is the diversity? Where are the non-white faces that we should be seeing around this table?
And there's been a lot of good research out there that the boards that have women usually outperform companies with boards that have not women on the board.
Absolutely. And boards that have diversity of all kinds are going to have
they're going to perform better, right? Yes. Broader, diverse, not all aligned with the same reaction. And I think that's the thing that, like, when you talk about that, Daniel, and you get that backlash, you've got people of limited experience and exposure. And in lots of places, it's possible to live your whole life, even live a big life, and not be exposed to people that don't look that much differently than you, you live in and operate in a community, a company that has a lot of people that look like you, that enforce your worldview. And you get like, oh, why should we have anything? Let them do that over there where the hell they are. That kind of mindset is messed up and misses the opportunity of having big, rich, diverse employees and like that kind of thing. And I think it's an ignorant, and I mean that in the most technical sense, not in the nastiest emotional side, but it's just kind of clueless. I'm unexperienced. I don't know any better. I haven't lived anywhere. I haven't been anywhere. I've barely seen things as I stayed in a Marriott hotel and went around some countries, right? That kind of mindset. You know what I'm talking about.
So, Bill, let me talk about that. The best explanation of that I've seen, Reid Hoffman, the founder of LinkedIn, calls the lottery of life.
Yeah.
And he said, I won the lottery of life. I couldn't get better ticket.
Yeah.
I was male, white, growing up in Silicon Valley in the technology and chip area. Like, you could not have given me a better lottery winner ticket. I said, it's my duty to do a big impact in the world precisely because of what I got.
Yes.
And I love that perspective. There's a couple of interviews of him online talking about it. And I really, really admire him for that. And he said, hey, compared to a black woman growing up in, I don't know, South Africa or Kenya or an Arab country where they could not even drive today, it's like, why did that happen? For me, it's been a big shock. I go to Latin America a lot. And whenever you're driving in cities in Latin America, you get a lot of kids in the streets asking you for money, no shoes and all things like that. And I look at my kids and I'm like, why that soul grew up here and why that soul was born there?
Yeah.
It's crazy. And it's just what it is in life. But that tells you our responsibility. Like if we grew up here and we had the good fortune of being in a family, my parents both are still married, they're still alive, they're still great health. They supported me going to any kind of school that I wanted, best degrees in the world. Like I had as you said, Bill, I was extremely fortunate on the life that I had up to now. And I have a duty to really do something well in life. And I commend Lee for seeing that.
Let me share a personal experience that I think for all of our listeners and viewers may be something. So I, too, straight white male, North American, English speaking, a life of upper middle class thing, great education, like all that, right? And yet some of the most important pieces of education in my life have been, and most memorable things have been walking and being out in Gaza. Being in sketchy crowd situations in North Africa as a very young person, being on the street when things went crazy in Panama City, in a bad neighborhood that I shouldn't have been in late at night. And one of the scariest ones, walking down the street in Colón on the Atlantic side of Panama, an old, long, I don't know what it's like today, but 35 years ago, I'm 20, fairly clueless, walking down the street with an expensive camera, watch, etc. And a van pulls up next to me and the door flings open. And a familiar face like mine says to me and my two friends in English, quickly, get in the car. You're not safe.
Oh, wow.
And I jumped in the car, and he described how somebody's hand had been cut off to steal their watch recently in this area. A careless visitor, right? It was a dangerous, it's just a poor place, right? And in extreme poverty, an ignorant white guy who looks like he doesn't have anything, doesn't know what's up, is likely to get robbed, and perhaps violently, right? I think about that, and I think about one of our family friends who stopped by our house, but lingered outside, a young African-American male, lingered outside for a minute to finish a phone call or a text, and a car pulled up slowly beside him and rolled down the window and asked if he was lost or needed directions. And the implication is clear, he doesn't belong there, right? But what's that like to have that every flippin' day of your life?
On the other side.
Yes.
So yesterday I got a video from a friend in a small town in Mexico.
Yeah.
And I cried when I saw the video. It was outside a supermarket, and it looked like a mom going to the supermarket. She has all her bags and stuff. And while she puts the things on the car, these two guys come, and while one is telling her, hey, can I get your cart so you don't have to drop it? I'll take it back so I could go to the supermarket myself. She gets distracted. This other guy gets on the back of her car. She gets into her car, nothing moves, using the camera on the outside, and then the other guy comes through the driver, so it looks like the other guy that came on the back already pulled her back.
Yeah.
You don't see it because it's inside the car.
Yeah.
And the car just walks outside. I got completely cold when I saw it. Like, it could be any mom just going on supermarket. It really made an impact on me. But hey, that's what we're seeing, and that's the inequality we're creating. I really believe that all of the base of this is the financial inequality.
Yes.
Everyone in the world had enough money to live well, we would have much less crime around the world. If we had opportunities of work for everyone, if we have good education for everyone, good health for everyone, and we had a more balanced equality in income. Like, who needs to have $131 billion? Like, what are they going to do with that? Like, it shouldn't even be allowed for an individual to have $130 billion. And of course, if you cannot feed your kids and you see that someone in the news has 131 billion, then what do you say? Then I could do it.
I think that, yeah, Danny, I think that's true, but I think that it's also, I think it's part of it, but I think it's more than that. I think that, I saw it, I'm not sure where I saw it. I'm going to misquote it, but it was, I was watching the Michelle Obama documentary the other night, and someone, I think it was her brother, was wearing a shirt. The basically just the writing, I just noticed the writing on his shirt, and it said something like, "It's hard to hate up close."
Oh, wow.
And I was like, yeah, wow. Because here's the thing. If you get to know anyone, you lock any two people in the room, I don't care who they are. Eventually you're gonna figure out some common ground. You're gonna figure out some things to love about each other, right? I remember one of the greatest leadership lessons that I ever learned. I was 28 years old, had just become president and general manager of a company. I had 300 plus employees, and I used to see people. I had an open door policy, of course, and I had just taken over after a Teamsters union campaign. Really flawed leadership was fired, and I was brought in. And so there was a lot of problem. There were a lot of angry employees, and they had justification for that anger. They had not been listened to. They had not been treated well. So I had obviously an open door policy, and I spent a lot of time talking to and listening to employees. And some of those employees, I could see through my window. You could see people coming down the hall, and there's one individual who, he was a really smart guy, and he had really good points, but he was angry. He was very angry a lot. He came at me with that anger, and I could see him coming. And every time I saw him coming, I was like, oh, crap, right? And I realized I kind of internally felt myself saying that when I saw him coming one day, and I was like, I can't do that. I can't cringe when I see an employee come. I have a responsibility as a leader to listen to him with an open heart and mind. I have to shift my narrative here. So I thought about it, and I don't know how I even came up with this, but it was one of the best things I ever learned. Was I realized, what if I find something to love about this guy? What if I find, I can't just like it because he was a real pain in the butt. Liking something about him is not going to be enough. I've got to find something to love about him, and maybe I can listen to him then in a different way. So doing that forced me to ask him different questions, and I discovered that he was an absolutely, get him talking about his family, like most of us, and his whole demeanor changed, and his face lit up, and how he talked about his wife of almost 50 years, and how he talked about his grandkids and his kids, and then learning more about his life experience and who he was, completely shifted how I listened to him. He didn't change, but how I listened to him changed. So it changed the interaction. And guess what? He wasn't pissed at me anymore. He wasn't angry when he walked through the door. And that lesson for me, that has stayed with me always. And it really shapes how I approach people, how I approach coaching. I think that we have to be willing to find something to love about everybody. And that sounds so cliched, and I'm sorry for that, but it's so true. We
I
can't
love it.
hate up close, and people are not willing to get close.
It's one of the most powerful things that I've ever done was I went last year with my wife, with Rich Manders, with his wife, with others, to coach in a federal maximum security or not state prison with Catherine Hoke, right? And she's a past guest on the show. We did a recording right after that session, but it was the most altering experience. And here are these people, and we're not talking about minor trumped up crimes. Most of these people readily admitted that they had murdered people, some of them quite a few people. And they also shared their stories with us. And this is part of a coaching program to rehabilitate and improve their lives and many of them were in with life with no possibility of parole, and yet they were in the program because they were given access to stuff. But as these people told me their life stories, I let go of the judgment, well, you made bad choices, and was like, it was the most obvious thing. Like, this is the way the world occurs for me, and so I did this. They grew up in such profoundly screwed up, violent, what's the word I'm looking for? Economically disadvantaged, uneducated. Like, they grew up in the most effed up environments, and the acts that began the thing that led them to prison were the most natural and obvious things in the vast majority of cases. And some were in for some pretty wacky, bizarre things too, a handful. But I had one man who stood across from me and took my hand, and he said, I killed so many times, I didn't feel anything. And I hugged him, and I told him I got it. And he said, there's no excuse, there's no whatever. It just became the way that I lived. It was the water he swam in.
I remember a interview, Tom Friedman, the guy from New York Times.
Yeah.
They were asking him, hey, this is 5 or 6 years ago. They were asking him why we get a lot of terrorists coming from the Arab world. And his response made something brilliant. And I think Bill is going to come similar to your story. He said, whenever you have a bunch of 18, 20-year-old male, they've never showed them love. They've never gave them education. They never gave them power or showed them power.
Right.
They've never showed them respect. And then the last thing he said, they never hold the hand of a woman. Then they become terrorists. And I thought that was the coldest response, but he was so true. Because life put them in that position, and they became who they are because of what the society did to them. When we're all kids, we laugh, we love, we all have the same DNA.
Yeah.
And then life gives us a certain experience or experiences that made us that. So that guy that you were
that environment,
that environment.
So,
right.
So what next, guys? I mean, what do you think? I mean, in terms of, I mean, we each have however much influence, but we have some spheres of influence, and we have the ability to impact others. We all do.
I don't think our CEOs, for the most part, are talking about this. I had a woman in one of the workshops in the last 2 weeks it was last week actually, female CEO, entrepreneur of color, and they are in a business downtown area, and they'd had an active shooter during the protests in their building. And her workforce is because it's also Bay Area, high LGBTQ, mostly people of color, so highly diverse and disadvantaged workforce. And then one right-leaning white woman, she was just at her wit's end, and I said, look, you can let me have it. You could just shout and scream and rant at me. I could take it. I'll represent that white male, whatever you need for a while. And she's like, I think I'm done. I just need to go sleep now and recover. She was so exhausted by it. But I think that's a kind of a notable exception. But for the most part, it's not yet something that my clients are talking about. They're not a lot talking about protests. They're not much in downtown areas. They're still dealing with the other crises, but I think it's going to come, right? Are you guys hearing people talking about it yet and asking about it? Because we're going to talk about, Vern made a recommendation of one thing. We'll talk about some other stuff, but is it yet a topic?
I'm still hearing it very little.
Yeah.
From at the level that we need to be discussing it.
Yeah.
To really have a change. And Lisa, you said something earlier that I hope this stays and really opens the conversations that we need. And I don't think we're at that level yet. We're still in shock at most. And we're also very worried for the economy and the virus. And we haven't really fully as a society have the right discussion at the right level for that. Yeah. I haven't seen any discussion on the politics level on that.
I think that the timing of this in terms of pre-elections that are coming up in the fall is interesting, and I hope it shapes how people vote. I think that there's no easy fixes, obviously, but the amazing lack of leadership that has been exhibited in this country. I hope that is impacted by this. I think, Bill, you said something earlier that I think is true too, though, is I think that on one hand, video and the transparency that is happening is going to continue to be very powerful. It's ubiquitous. There's not going to be anywhere to hide. The flip side of that is that we are so inundated from media and social media we almost become numb to things, right? I mean, there is a very real psychic numbness that comes from just being it's too much. We can't take it in. We can't keep taking it in. And so I think that we need to be careful of that. We need to be careful and not give ourselves permission to say, oh, darn, that's too bad. There's another bad thing that happened. And I think that certainly a lot of us have been guilty of that. I have. I mean, you just sort of shut down. I think that we have to be willing to, or I can't speak for others. I have to be willing to say, okay, what can I do about that?
Right.
There's a lot I can't do. What can I do? Or who is doing work that I believe in? What organizations can I contribute to, both my presence and my dollars, that I believe will make an impact and that I can get behind and support and maintain a commitment to, because it's not okay. It's got to stop.
So Vern talks about a company, and then I have a past association with a guy who did work on trying to reform criminal justice. I mentioned Catherine Hope talking about reforming prison and incarceration rates, and then I worked very briefly years ago with Van Jones, who had the Ella Baker Center for Human Rights and has been a campaigner against, he's now a CNN host. But Vern talks about fog break justice and Shanti Breen, and they are working to transform law enforcement and try to change the criminal justice system and promote things there. And they have a blog post, what action people can take right now other than protesting. How can you lend your voice and offer support and speak up in a positive way? So we'll put the link to that in the show notes as well. But
I would love to read it.
What's that?
I would love to read it.
Fog break justice, what actions can people take right now? Has a range of things listed in there. What can you do? So communicate with law enforcement, do a personal assessment on race, bias, privilege. Ask yourself, are you working to become anti-racist? Not simply, are you not racist, but how are you working against those things under the surface? And I can think of almost every place that I've worked in over the years where there have been nasty comments about other races and other women. that have come along at different point, other race, other genders, right, and including sexual orientations, that kind of thing. Oh, don't be like those people, right, or whatever it was. Oh well, and then eye rolling about one group or another. But how do we speak out and say, no, that's not okay, that's not enough? My favorite of the last little bit has been Chris Rock's statement that we can't afford to have bad apples in the police force. It's like pilots. Right? You don't say, oh, well, we were mostly great pilots, but there's a few bad apples, and they they'll fly you right into a mountain. Like there's a zero tolerance for that kind of thing, right? As soon as one happens, like they eliminate that pretty quickly. We need to have that same kind of thing, and we can't have groups rallying around and protecting the same. I mean, we've seen this in like the Catholic Church, where protecting the church meant protecting abusive priests and that kind of thing. My apologies to you. I don't not mean to attack it, but I am willing to speak out against those that would do horrible things, right? And the same thing true with, right, if you don't take an active thing against. So they talk about that. They talk about supporting organizations that are making a difference, and the importance, as you said, Lisa, of voting.
Yes, we've got to vote literally, and we've got to vote with our wallets, and we have to vote with our actions.
You can't afford to tell yourself, oh, they're all the same. Both sides are the same. It's all just nonsense. I'm going to vote for whoever. Like, no, it matters. It makes a difference.
No, that means being willing to educate ourselves. It's, I have the great blessing of having two kids, a 21-year-old and an 18-year-old. And they have a lot of time on their hands right now. But they are, very informed, and they bring a great perspective to the table, and so they bring me a lot of information, and they inform me on a lot of things, and boy, they let me know if somehow I need to research something further or learn more information. But we have to have people in our lives that push us and force us to, like, if you don't, it's not okay to just say, oh well, I don't really understand that issue. We need to understand it. You need to read. You need to research. There are books. There are articles. There's no excuse for us not being educated and informed and understand what actions to take. And I think that is the conversation that I'm going to shift in terms of even just my conversations with clients. One of the things that I look for in prospective clients is, do they have any kind of diversity on their executive team in their organization? And I think that those questions need to become even more pointed in my conversations with them.
Well, I like what you said a minute ago as well, Daniel, that goes along that is, terrorists from the Middle East, right? I've spent a lot of time in the Middle East on all sides of the region and working with companies there, and that, and I would say we have more cases of murderous violence in the United States propagated by disgruntled, angry, disadvantaged, messed up, emotionally troubled white males than anything else, against whatever group they perceive as, and they're carrying guns and like out there, whatever. And again and again and again with an element of messed upness. How is that any different? We for one reason or another, we call the other terrorism, and we don't call that terrorism when a guy drives a car into a crowd of protesters on the East Coast. What do you call it when somebody drives a car into a crowd in London? We call that terrorism because that person happens to be that. But in my mind, those are completely the same thing. When an angry white guy drives a car into a crowd, and we've seen 2 or 3 cases, to my knowledge, just in the last week here, where somebody drove a Jeep into somebody in California and somebody ran somebody over here and then backed over them. In my mind, that is the same thing.
So how can we do something? I always, as we had a discussion earlier, instead of telling people what to do, we need to start internally.
Right.
So as business coaches, the 3 of us, we influence a lot of very influential people.
Yes.
We help a lot of CEOs that have a lot of employees, some 20, 30, some hundreds.
Yes.
What's our right thing to do?
Yes.
Lisa, what kind of conversation we need to start to have with them against in favor of diversity, as an example? What other conversations do we need to have to be able to do our own small part in the world?
Yeah, what do you guys think?
I think the first step is being willing to simply ask the questions, right? I mean, I have, when I join with a client and look around the table and I don't see women, and I see a bunch of white people. In fact, I've had clients hire me. I mean, one of my favorite clients, he said, he was talking to me, he said, well, I think I need to hire you because we're a bunch of, middle-aged white guys and we need someone who's not to be sitting at our table. I'm like, okay, yeah, you do. That's great. But I'm just, so I guess as a woman, I'm a good start, but let's take that further. But I mean, I think we have to be willing to ask the question if we're not seeing it, and if we're not seeing it in their organization, to at least ask the question, what do you think about that? Why is that? Is this okay with you?
That's a first start.
Yeah, it's a start. I'm not saying it's everything, but I think are we having the conversations? Are we asking the questions?
And let me ask on the other side. So we're talking about the employees and the team members of the companies we advise. What about their clients? The other day, we were working with a client and we realized that all the marketing, all the positioning, the product, the pricing was kind of entitled for white males, right? All the pictures were like that.
The messaging.
The messaging, correct, right?
Yeah.
And we asked the question, said, hey, why you're doing this? And they said, well, most of the clients that buy our product at the pricing that they buy is because of, or most of them are white males. So we target white males. If you see a lot of the ads of pharma, most of it's to adults, older 70s or so white males. So I think we have to also do it internally, but also externally, and really be able to drive a message of inclusion in the services and products we offer and our clients offer.
Well, that brings up for me I think something that's fundamental to like all of our coaching and fundamental to leadership, period, that starts with me as a coach and then out to the CEO and then out around. You have to look in the mirror first. Around any subject, you've got to ask yourself, who am I in this matter? What is it that I haven't considered? And you've got to look searingly into your own eyes and say, what is there that's not okay here, that should not see the light of day? What do I need to deal with myself? And then around, right, what do I need to deal with my team and with my company, and then out, that kind of thing. So that for me is first and foremost, like start with you and then work out. And then the other one is when interacting with others, ask yourself, what's it like to be them? Not asking what's wrong with Daniel or what's wrong with Lisa, but asking yourself, God, where are they coming from? What's this like for them? How might this be for them? And considering that, I mean, that's the core to empathy, right? But considering that their worldview is one of my favorite business books from my background, 3 Laws of Performance, says that performance is a function of action or a result of action. And our actions are naturally and completely correlated with the way we see the world, right? So I see the world one way, I take certain actions, I get certain outcomes. If you want to change the performance, you need to change the way you see the world. So if I'm interacting with either of you or one of my clients or whatever, I want to consider how might you see the world right now? And is there any way to alter your view of the world so that kind of thing? But the first question is, how do they see the world? Like, why do they keep doing this stuff? Oh, because it looks this way to them.
So how do you change the view of someone? We talk about travel. Travel, I think, by far.
Right, education, travel.
Education, travel.
And
but in
non-traditional education is travel, right?
Sorry?
Travel is a kind of non-traditional education.
Correct. But now that we're all home, and by the way, one of the big things that we're
or used to be.
It used to be, yeah. One of the big things that I'm seeing that is going to stay here is international travel. I really believe international travel is going to significantly decrease. And we're going to do way more national travel and regions, like they're calling the bridge between Australia and New Zealand, right? They already open planes, but it's just Australia and New Zealand, right?
Yeah.
So our North America, are we going to have just US, Canada, Mexico to start? Are we going to have Central America? What are these groups of countries that are together? They're going to have a lot of travel inside the group of countries or just one country, but not that international as was before.
I think even domestic travel is. I don't have a crystal ball, but I think that's going to be one of the last things to really come back. There's the
it's going to be challenging, right?
Yeah.
If I got on a plane and it was 2/3 empty, I'd probably
so
feel
there's if you Google TSA traffic, they have a website where they're showing daily traffic.
Yeah.
Today we're 85% down.
Right.
And it got to 95% down.
But if you get on a plane, if they're only flying 10, 20% of the planes, then you're still getting on a full airplane, right? And that's the idea where we've packed more and more people into smaller places, especially if you're not affording the expensive seats up front, is a particular challenge, right? If I got on a plane that was packed full of people, I'd be really uncomfortable. If I got on a plane that's packed full of people and nobody's wearing a mask until something changes, I'm not comfortable.
Yeah. But going back to the what we can do, I think that I think that part of it is we're doing it. As I said, and in some ways, I kind of, when I saw the topic, Bill, when you sent it to me last night, I was like, I kind of, because, I sort of I feel presumptuous even having to who am I to have this conversation? Right. I feel like it's almost not my place, but I think it is all of our places to at least talk about it. How interesting that is to others, I don't know, but to at least be willing to have the conversation and talk about it. And I think that continuing that and asking these same questions to our coaches and clients, and being willing to continue having this conversation and asking what are we doing, what can we do, taking that to action. It can't just be talk. We've got to look at the actions. And if literally every single person that we're influencing takes action and continues to take action and following through, whether it's supporting some of the great organizations that are already out there, already doing work to try to impact this. It's voting, it's continuing to read and not turning off the news and being like, oh my gosh, I can't take anymore, but being willing to watch the hard stuff. I think that's the only thing that I know of so far, in all of the thinking and reading that I've done this week. That's at least the first step.
Let me put it in business terms for folks. Opportunity and risk, right? You do nothing, you put your business and yourself and your society at risk.
Yep.
You take action, you skate to where the puck is going, you address and you look at trends and you get ahead of them and you before what matters to people, then you're reaching into the realm of opportunity. And that is also good business. I'm selling now, if you will, saying why we should care. Because if you don't take responsible action, you put everything at risk in a time where things have been driven up so much. This isn't a thing to wait until it's over. And leaning into it and addressing it, because I had the same reaction. I'm like, what are we going to talk about this week? We had this thing recorded coming up and then the whole world's blown up like this. And Vern was really helpful in writing the insights in the way that he did this week, because it was like, oh yeah, that is what we should talk about. And I'm like, oh God, I'm not an expert in this, but we each bring a little bit of something. And our first value in my business, my first leading value is courageous authenticity, right? I'll share the things that I've done and said and where I'm struggling and be open about something, right? And some aspect of that, we probably all have a little bit of that.
Mm-hmm.
And Lisa, you mentioned something earlier when I was telling the story of our messaging this week.
Yeah.
And you said you could not be afraid of sharing who you are
Yeah.
and what you believe. So the values. Hey, did we got unsubscribes? Oh yeah, we got people subscribing.
Yeah.
But I'm happy that they unsubscribe. The other day I was.
I'm sad that I'm still shocked by that. Like, right? Like that's probably just the definition of white privilege. I'm like, what? Like, how could people not applaud you for being willing to admit that and do something about that? It's just like,
you saw the cyclist this week, that there was these young people putting signs of Black Lives Matter, and he was riding his bicycle and he attacked them. Like we're still seeing that.
Yeah.
I really,
that's a either or. They're not like me. I can't be with that. I'm threatened by that. I don't even understand that, but it's upsetting to me, right? That's threat and fear, and then a reaction to that, a defensive.
But I believe that we have to start by being true to who we are,
Yeah,
and our core values, and don't be afraid. The only way we're going to create the change that we need is if we act with our core values and deep as a human being, and let people decide.
And I think too, though, that this, I love something, Bill, that you said, which is trying to understand where people are coming from, and also being willing to listen to others with a little less judgment and willingness to sort of forgive stumbling. I mean, absolutely, when people come out with racist and ignorant statements, that's really hard and ridiculous to hear, and we have to be willing to respond to that. At the same time, I think I've seen almost this brutality in how when people make some missteps or say something that maybe they're truly ignorant and not racist, but just not anti-racist, we're really quick to jump on and attack people versus trying to educate and inform and see the perspective. And because if we just keep attacking each other, no one listens to someone who, if you're going to attack me, it's really hard for me to listen to you, and vice versa. Right. So if we're being attacked or if we're attacking others, I think that trying to change that narrative and have the conversation, not excusing any of the wrong-headedness, but we're not going to get anywhere if we just keep attacking each other. There has to be a dialogue. There has to be a narrative. I don't presume to know how to open up all of those narratives, but if we're so quick to condemn people without being willing to take the next step and try to share some information that might change their perspective and viewpoint, then how are we ever going to do that?
Well, I think you're suggesting is that everyone is redeemable. There's no one without redemption. There's no one who cannot apologize, reform, whatever. And we've seen people who've gone from like Nazi backgrounds to being pro-racial harmony kinds of things. We've seen people apologize for their past actions and things and take an active role in repairing the damage.
Yeah. And I don't presume to know how to bring all of that about, but I think that just vehement vocal condemnation of people without coming out with that next step of here's what you may not understand. Here's something that can help. It's not going to get us anywhere. I mean, that's really, it's not super useful. It's not going to change the results. So what will is always the question, right?
Yeah. Well, so we've got some links and some suggestions for you. I think we don't have ready, easy answers for people this time. We have some things to think about. So Dr. Frances Fry and her new book, Unleashed, The Unapologetic Leader's Guide to Empowering Everyone Around You. The Harvard Business Review article, U.S. Business Must Take Meaningful Action Against Racism. We'll have those links in Blog Break Justice as well, with their blog post of actions people could take right now. And then I suppose maybe what we have talked about is looking in the mirror, looking at what you're doing, asking yourself where you're complicit in some way, or what you could have done that isn't living up to what you really care about, unconsciously or actively, and then starting to consider others' points of view and perspectives and worldviews, right?
There's a video that I just would like to close with. There's a video, and I'll send you a link. Chick-fil-A has a part of their training, a video that it's in YouTube that it's called "Everyone Has a Story if you're willing to hear it," and I think they got it right on. If we're willing to hear the story, like the story that you told about the guy that has killed a lot of people,
right?
We're willing to hear the story.
Yes.
And then that made a connection. Lisa said the same thing. When you had this angry employee, you had listened his story, understand something that you could love about him,
Yes.
and that created a connection. I think that's what creates human connection, and we see someone else's perspective and thoughts, and that will allow us to understand them better.
So some reminders for the folks. If the show helped you, please share it with somebody else like it, subscribe to it. We put out something every week, usually with a thought leader, sometimes with a few other coaches, clients, case studies, that kind of thing. We've got stuff all the time of things dealing with the world of leadership in growth companies. If you want to send us some feedback, if you want to rant at us or offer some support or anything like that, send an email to info@scalingcoach.com. I want to give special thanks to Vern Harnish with the topic for the week and the resources here. He's the creator of the Scaling Up Framework and the original Rockefeller Habits. Our show is produced by Lucy Summers, who gets us all together and arranges everything behind the scenes. The audio is edited by Albert Burge at Podfly Productions, and our show notes will be written by Ayn Kodina and proofread by Tim McGowan. Lisa Ridley is in Phoenix, compassgroup.coach, right? And Daniel Marcos is growthinstitute.com. And of course, I'm Scaling Coach, scalingcoach.com. Thanks again, everyone, for listening. Keep scaling up.